Up next, the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. After this message.
Evergreen's calling.
Are you getting enough CBD each day? Hemp Meds carries the most trusted CBD oil brands like Real Scientific Hemp Oil and Dixie Botanicals to make it easy to add cannabinoids like CBD to your diet. We hold all our hemp oil products to our rigorous triple lab tested standard to ensure that you and your family receive only the highest quality and most reliable CBD products. Hemp Meds is your trusted source for CBD. Visit hempmeds.com to get our premium CBD oil today. Use discount code CBD20 to get 20% off your first order.
You're busy, running around from work to kids to evening events. Healthcare shouldn't be adding to your daily running around. Simplify your healthcare with Healthterra for only $15 per month per individual or $18 per month per family with up to 9 kids, by the way. You can eliminate doctor office visits with 24/7 access to doctors via phone, video, or the mobile app. Not only do you get prescriptions filled over the phone, but save up to 85% on those prescriptions. This is a supplemental plan and not insurance. Healthcare made easy. Healthterra.com.
And now, broadcasting on StarWorldWideNetworks.com, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Evergreen is calling.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, and happy to be here with you today. A couple of months ago, we interviewed Mara Gordon, who has spent nearly 2 decades researching and working with patients to help them determine optimal cannabis formulations specific to their disease profiles. She spent a great deal of time working with cancer patients in particular, who've experienced incredible results by combining conventional cancer treatment with cannabis protocols. Most people understand that medical marijuana works to deal with adverse side effects of chemotherapy, including pain, nausea, and loss of appetite. We also know that cannabis works even better than synthetic pharmaceuticals for certain neurological and autoimmune conditions. But what I find most interesting is that cannabis is helping to improve patient outcomes when combined with conventional treatments. As Mara explained, she's finding this approach increases odds that a cancer patient can survive beyond average life expectancy for later stages of the disease. It makes sense when you consider that cannabinoids have natural anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, and restorative qualities, which can mitigate debilitating side effects of toxic synthetic drugs. With more and more patients becoming aware of the benefits of medical marijuana, the need for informed medical expertise is at an all-time high. Of course, no pun intended. Navigating cannabis treatment, especially when undergoing traditional drug treatment for life-threatening conditions, is especially daunting for new patients. Finding medical doctors to talk about cannabis options is even more challenging. To answer the growing demand for patient guidance, Mara put her theories and research into practice. She was instrumental in forming Calice Spring Wellness, a holistic health clinic in Northern California where patients can access a number of integrative health physicians who are knowledgeable about cannabis therapies. That's the topic of today's show, and we are very fortunate to have 2 of these medical doctors with us today. But before I introduce them, Dr. Brian Donner has our Medical Marijuana Minute. What do you have for us today, Dr. Donner?
Thank you, Snowden. Happy to be here. Really have only scratched the surface when it comes to learning the many ways cannabis can help patients. Physicians and researchers are only just beginning to understand how and why it works so well to address root causes of certain conditions, as opposed to treating the symptoms alone. We are also learning that cannabis affects everyone differently. How and why has been a medical mystery that scientists are just now beginning to understand. There is no doubt that more clinical trials are needed to help doctors and patients navigate the science of cannabis and its benefits to human health. Physicians and clinical providers, we have an obligation to our patients to be able to understand this, to at least on some level to be able to work with them and to be able to answer their questions and to be able to help to try to guide them. we've had research out there. It's really encouraging. It's showing these, but we really need to fine-tune that and take that to the next level as well. But when you look at this broken down, sort of the basic science of the cannabinoid system versus the clinical effects of how we're trying to modulate that, essentially, I think we might have a better handle on if you look sort of the physiological, the biochemical, really breaking it down sort of on the molecular level, but really how that quantifies out into what type of effects do those have physiologically. I think we don't have quite as good of a grasp on that. I think that's so important to be able to really try to educate and open the mind to not only physicians but medical students and researchers. This is a time in our country that this will happen once. And us as clinicians and researchers, we're able to take part of this and really have an impact on how things are laid out in the future. And to me, as a physician and as a researcher, I find that fascinating and very fulfilling. I'm Dr. Brian Donner for the Cannabis Reporter. I'll be back again next week with another edition of the Medical Marijuana Minute. Back to you, Snowden.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donner. We look forward to hearing from you again next week. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Dr. Joe D. Goldstrich. He's been practicing medicine since 1964 and attained fellowships in metabolism, diabetes, and cardiology. He's worked with the American Heart Association and the Pritikin Longevity Center and helped found the Free Clinic in Dallas. He is a big believer in the power of natural medicine combined with nutrition and concentrated nutritional supplements to support healing and longevity. I'm so happy you could be with us today, Dr. Joe.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you again. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Harry McElroy. He became an acupuncturist before going to medical school, and today he's an integrative physician certified with the Institute of Functional Medicine. Before medical school, completion of the residency at Contra Costa Regional Medical Center, his background in nutrition led him to an interest in natural healing. He has a master's degree in acupuncture and Chinese medicine and strives to provide patients with health tools that empower them to improve their overall well-being. So thank you, Dr. Harry, for being here. I'm glad you could join us as well.
Yes, hi. Glad to be here as well.
So, Dr. Joe, I want to start with you because you became a doctor when the war on drugs was just getting started. And the green closet is sort of something that I refer to quite a bit because, there are so many physicians who, even now with all we know, are just really not able to or just afraid to deal with cannabis treatment with their patients and often refer them out to, either other clinics or healthcare practitioners who are just learning about cannabis. But it's really unusual to find doctors who are willing and able to really talk about cannabis with their patients, in conventional treatment settings. So I'm really interested to learn how you became interested in integrating cannabis into your medical practice, just as a starter.
We could probably take the whole hour if I told that story in detail, because cannabis has been an interest of mine since I was a teenager. And in fact, I was just this past week, I was thinking about when I was a young cardiologist in the early 70s. I was interested in cannabis then, and I read a book by Andy Weil, Dr. Andrew Weil, called The Natural Mind. And it was, Dr. Weil explained about cannabis and expanding consciousness. And it was the first time in my life that I did not feel like a criminal because I thought that there was value to cannabis. That said, I did not have any inkling at that time of the vast medical impact that cannabis could have on so many different diseases. And I was surprised. I remember that in about 10 years ago, I saw an article by a company called Cannabis Science, and they had they had a case of an individual with a skin cancer, and that patient put the cannabis oil on the skin cancer, and it went away. And I thought, that's just amazing. I would have never thought that could be possible. And a few years later, well, let me back up. About that time, I retired from my practice as a cardiologist. I didn't practice real cardiology. I didn't like the cath lab. It always made me nervous. So I tried to teach people how to prevent their atherosclerosis and how to eat well and exercise and take good care of themselves. But nonetheless, I was old enough to retire, and I was the way that I saw this piece from Cannabis Science was I was looking for something to do because retirement didn't agree with me. I was bored and didn't know what to do with myself. So one of the things that I played with around that time was day trading. And this company, Cannabis Science, got a big boost in stock sales after they showed these reports of cannabis oil curing or making skin cancer go away, but I didn't really stay with the day trading very long. That wasn't really who I was. And about 2012, I saw an ad for a job in Southern California to work in a clinic that gave medical cannabis recommendations, and I applied for that job, and they accepted me, and I went to that clinic, and I lasted 6 days because it just wasn't what I wanted to do. It was people that really didn't have significant medical issues coming in to try to get the card so they could get high. And I don't have any real problem with that, but it's just not what I wanted to do. So I sort of put the cannabis on the back burner again, but I continued to scout and look for opportunities to enter the field. And a few years later, I saw a job position from a company in California called Medican. Dr. Sean Talleyrand was looking for somebody, and he said he had the most ethical clinic in California. And so I applied for that job, and I went out and I interviewed with him and talked to patients for 3 days. And they were real patients. They had real problems. And they were telling stories of how cannabis helped them. And I said, I want to learn more about that. So I signed on, and I spent a year, 2014, in Oakland in a clinic that gave the recommendations. And most of those patients were sick people that were using cannabis. And I learned a lot from those patients. They taught me how to use cannabis. However, at the end of that year, I realized that even though I knew the conditions that cannabis could be helpful for, I really didn't know how to help people use it in the way that I wanted to help people as a physician who can make a definitive recommendation. And so I'm going to back up again a little bit. So during that year, 2014, I joined an organization called the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. And at one of their quarterly meetings, Maura Gordon spoke. And she showed her slides of patients whose brain cancers were shrinking with cannabis. And she talked about therapeutic protocols. And that's what I was looking for, was therapeutic protocols. So later in 2014, I actually heard Maura speak again at a conference in Denver. And so after that second time that I heard her speak, I realized that what she was doing was what I wanted to do. So I contacted her and asked her if she would teach me how to do what she did. And I actually had to pester her for about 3 months before she finally agreed to do it. And so in 2015, I spent about 9 months on the phone with Mara as she did her consultations, just listening to what she did and analyzing the way that she made her therapeutic recommendations. And then beginning in 2016, I started doing that with Calice Spring Wellness on my own, and have continued to do that to this day.
Yeah, Mara's research in this area has just been phenomenal. I mean, I've heard her speak a couple of times, and that's how I wound up approaching her to be on this show, because she's such a wealth of information. And, even though it's not something that the FDA would look at and say, oh, yes, that's a clinical study, I mean, she has the data to prove, the anecdotal data to prove that this treatment works. And anyway, it's fascinating. So, well, good for you for getting in touch with her, because I know that, with anybody like that, it's very difficult because there are so few people, or there were, and it's starting to grow now, but there were so few people like her out there. And it's really important that she has you and Dr. Harry as well, there by her side, and the other clinicians who are also on board there. So, Dr. Harry, tell me how you became interested in cannabis as an alternative treatment.
Sure, absolutely, and I appreciate. I got some history from Dr. Joe's talk there, right, too. So it was nice to hear that timeline. I grew up in a very family rich in allopathic doctors. My dad and both my grandfathers, and came out to California from the Midwest and very quickly pivoted and decided I wanted to do more anthropology and natural medicine, and ended up graduating from college and going in and getting a master's in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And, at that time, half of that training was herbal medicine. And some people know, but not everyone, that cannabis is actually in the Chinese materia medica. It's, I'm gonna mess up on the intonation, but it's Da Ma. And, so the idea that cannabis has been around for a long time was interesting to me, because I don't think that was something growing up in America. It was really, everything was in a recreational context, and so it was noted. It's not something that's really used that often. It's not a primary herb, because it was mostly the hemp derivative in Chinese medicine. But anyway, acknowledging that there was a medical application that had been around for more than 1,000 years, and then fast forwarding a little bit and getting out and practicing in California doing Chinese medicine. And then I went to medical school actually in Arizona, at the University of Arizona. And at that point this was around 2005 or so, there was certainly no medical cannabis or marijuana in Arizona at that point. And so I kind of just marched through the training and then came out to do my residency in family medicine at Contra Costa, as you mentioned earlier, which is in the East Bay and the San Francisco Bay area. And I started having patients come in saying, listen, I'm putting this salve on my knee. I'm maybe smoking this chemovar or strain of cannabis, or I'm taking this oil and I don't need as many opiates, right? And so, you know what, you can give me half the opiates this month, and I'm going to continue using the cannabis. That really piqued my interest, because that was a little bit of a far cry from the initial, Prop 215 in 1996 when the medical marijuana got passed. It was really more around ameliorating and treating the symptoms of HIV/AIDS and certainly cancer, with the nausea and the pain along with that. But this was someone coming in and saying, "Listen, this works really well for pain." I started having other patients come in and say, "You know what? I'm using this strain here that's got more CBD in it to help with my anxiety." And so this whole, to some degree, almost a Pandora's box of recognizing that all these other cannabinoids in the cannabis plant had so many different uses and potentialities. And I thought that was really intriguing, more almost from the intellectual scientific side. Is like, wow, this is great. This isn't just like, here, have some cannabis and it'll help with your nausea or help with your pain. It's like, wow, what can we do by balancing and adjusting the ratios of these cannabinoids to really be more specific for the individual patient in front of you? And so that kind of got me roughly started. And as with a lot of things, I wanted to learn more. And so I had reached out to a friend of mine in Oakland, California, who has one of the best Chinese herb dispensaries, Ben Zappin, and said, what do you know about this? Do you know other people that are using the cannabis more from a professional herbal standpoint? And he had pointed me through a couple different directions that ended up leading to Mara, and we met and hit it off. And everything that has been said about her thus far is totally true. She's an amazingly intelligent woman, very driven, and has this great background in process engineering. And so her lens and how she's able to really accumulate this information and being able to collate it into very workable, usable means is I don't know anybody else who's been able to do it as well. And so I had met her, and then very shortly after I met Dr. Joe, who really opened his mind and heart and became a great mentor to me, and is really continues to this day help me along if I have questions with more complicated patients, but also operating independently and seeing patients via Calispring Wellness. And so that is it in a nutshell, and it's been a lot of fun and gets to be more fun with each passing month.
So what's the most intriguing part of dealing with patients? Let me put it this way: when someone comes in and someone may have recommended to them that they should try medical marijuana. What is your first approach with a patient? Let's start with you, Dr. Joe.
Well, all the patients that I see have sort of been screened in a way. They've screened themselves. They've decided that they want to use the cannabis. So I don't have to convince them. That's their decision. Most of the people. There are a few that want to learn, will cannabis help me? And I'm quite candid with them. If I think that there are better ways to deal with their condition, I will tell them. I've had a long experience in natural medicine. I'm just thinking of a woman recently who was found to have a pre-malignant polyp on colonoscopy, and she wanted to know if cannabis was the best thing to use to make that polyp go away. And I said I would try a nutritional approach before I embarked down the cannabis road. And so I advised her on the supplements and herbs that would be most likely to help her with that polyp. But that's the exception. Most of the people come because they have cancer. They know, for example, that they have a very poor prognosis. There are some that come because they've been told there's nothing else that traditional medicine can do for them to go home and get their affairs in order. And many of these cancer patients are desperate people that are hoping that the cannabis will help them. And it often does. It often does. Thank God.
Yeah, it's really astonishing to me when I talk to cancer survivors, and I've had several on this show to talk about their experiences, and several of them have told me, I was stage 4, there was nothing more anyone could do for me, and 6 months later, well after their life expectancy, according to their oncologists, they're there to tell the story of how these tumors are disappearing. And I find that really interesting, especially since the National Cancer Institute a while back did some laboratory studies finding that, different cannabis, different cannabinoids, I believe that it was just a combination, and they didn't really know how many cannabinoids were in the cannabis plant, but it would basically have just been, a THC, CBD kind of combination, I guess, in a laboratory setting with the cannabis actually working to kill the cancer cells in that setting. And no studies really have confirmed this in a human clinical setting that I know about in the U.S. anyway, because it's just not been permitted. But it's really fascinating, to hear this anecdotal evidence. I mean, Dr. Harry, are you finding that this is just opening your eyes to like a whole new whole new world of treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really been phenomenal on so many levels. And I think that part of it is just in general, as a physician, when a patient comes in, the most important thing always is getting an appropriate history and seeing where they're coming from. And then depending on what the diagnosis is, that really can veer us in ways, as Dr. Joe was saying, maybe cannabis can be a part of this protocol, but really we need to do some nutritional and lifestyle aspects that are going to be really helpful. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people that are coming in with, stage 4 metastatic disease, and their oncologist says, listen, there's really nothing more that we have to offer. And that's a very different conversation that you're having with the person as far as like how central the cannabis is going to be a part of their healing process. And so from that standpoint, it's incredibly varied. It's a very rich experience as well because of how dynamic it can be. But then also really diving in and saying, okay, well, if we do this ratio based on the genetics of your cancer, we're going to start with this protocol and see how you do. And just like in other things with oncology, it's, we follow progress by symptoms, and if symptoms get better for worse, and then also by following up with scans and imaging. And so, I really like that process of engaging in a relationship with the patient and following that through to whatever the end may be.
Yeah, and how much do you think the integrative approach of nutrition and cannabis combined with actual traditional cancer protocols, how much do you think that the cannabis itself is really responsible for a lot of this healing versus, let's say, doing the traditional cancer treatment approach with integrating nutritional changes and stuff like that? I mean, have you noticed what the real differences are?
Well, I'll take that question. I as time goes on, I've simplified my nutritional approach with patients for several reasons. One, it turns out that in the let me back up and just say that all of the work, because cannabis is a Schedule I drug, there are no clinical trials in this country, right. and there won't be until the scheduling changes, and it needs to change sooner rather than later. So we're not going to get the kind of clinical data that we have for pharmaceutical drugs for cannabis in the near future. So what we have to do is cobble together the preclinical research that's been done around the world. And there are thousands of articles in the medical literature, peer-reviewed articles that have good science. They're done sometimes with animals. They're done with cancer cell lines. They're done with cancer cells that are implanted into animals, and then they're treated with cannabis. And we have to use this clinical or this non-clinical research, this preclinical research, and base our approach with the patient and how much cannabis to use and what varieties of cannabinoids to use based on this preclinical research. So that's what we do. That's what we do on a daily basis. Now, it turns out that some of this preclinical research has shown that antioxidants will inactivate CBD's ability to kill cancer cells. CBD and THC are the two main cannabinoids that are active against cancer, and the CBD is inactivated by antioxidants. So when I first started this work, I didn't know that, and I was prescribing a lot of supplements that have anti-cancer activity, like curcumin, like medicinal mushrooms, melatonin, all these vitamins that have antioxidant activity, vitamins and herbs. But I've stopped recommending those. In fact, I specifically tell people not to take those supplements because it may interfere with the action of the CBD. Wow. So I've simplified and boiled down my nutritional advice to patients to one simple guideline: do not eat any sugar and limit the number of foods, the number of carbohydrates that you eat that can be converted to sugar readily. And that's because cancer cells preferentially use sugar for energy. So if you can starve those cancer cells by limiting the sugar, then I think that's the most important nutritional recommendation, advice that I can give to my patients. So it's pretty much now using the cannabis. My experience is that when cannabis is combined with chemotherapy, there's a greater likelihood that the patient's tumor will regress. And I've seen a number of patients who have failed on specific chemotherapies. And when cannabis has been introduced and this chemotherapy has also been reintroduced, the chemotherapy worked on the second time when it didn't work the first go round when there was no cannabis on board. So the nutritional stuff is not as important for me as it once was.
Right. That's fascinating. This is, I don't pretend to know everything about cannabis, but I'm a voracious reader and researcher when it comes to this sort of thing. And when I start talking about this on this show and writing about it online, I try to research every aspect that I possibly can. And you are the first person who told me this about antioxidants. I had absolutely no idea. Do you have any idea why?
Yes, I do. It turns out that the way that cannabidiol, CBD, induces cell death in the cancer cells is through a pro-oxidative mechanism. Now, that's not unlike many of the chemotherapies. They induce an oxidative state, and radiation induces a pro-oxidative state. And high-dose intravenous vitamin C becomes a pro-oxidant when it's given in high dose. So oxidation is a tool that can kill cancer cells. And if you take antioxidants, you neutralize that tool. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. That is really fascinating. I'm definitely going to follow up and look into this because I think that a lot of people assume that combining antioxidants with cannabinoids of any kind would probably be a really good idea, but for cancer, maybe not. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well, Snowden. And part of that is just showing, giving a nod to the complexity of this, and not just to the complexity of the patient, but also, what is their diagnosis and how are we going to treat it? And so I think with cancer, I do, much the same process as Dr. Joe, and I think he does the same in the sense that if we're working with insomnia or chronic pain, then that's a time where, maybe I will have them add some melatonin, some magnesium to their bedtime ritual as far as getting to sleep, or if it's a chronic pain, doing some alpha lipoic acid along with the THC. And so it really is, I think, pretty dynamic. And so there's not a one size fits all with this at all.
Right. Well, it's just so interesting because, it's counterintuitive what I've learned here. Because on the one hand, a diet rich in antioxidants can help prevent cancer, as far as I know. Would you say that that's pretty accurate, or is that I don't really know.
I don't either.
Yeah, but I've heard this, and antioxidants are something that are promoted quite frequently in health circles and health publications, and experts who write articles about these things, get your antioxidants to keep yourself healthy and ward off, debilitating disease. And so, it's very interesting. I'm definitely going to look into this.
I take curcumin and a number of other antioxidants, but I don't have cancer, and I'm not using cannabis to try to kill the cancer. So you have to be aware of everything that you put in your body and know the ramifications. And I wouldn't have guessed that. The researcher who has been done the most work in this is a man named Eric Singer, who works in Dr. Sean McAllister's lab at the Pacific Medical Center, if anybody wants to look up the research. And he's been doing this research with the antioxidants and CBD for a couple of years now, and has more articles in the scientific literature than anyone else on this topic.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me, and I think it's probably something that a lot of people might be really interested to hear, because I mean, I think cancer is one of those conditions that really attracts people into learning more about cannabis, because the word gets out that patients have been successful fighting their disease with different cannabis protocols. So yeah, I'm definitely going to look into this. I don't know. So, and other diseases that you see quite frequently at Calispring Wellness, tell me about some of the other most common conditions that people come in for.
Well, I have a patient tomorrow who has Crohn's disease, and if you understand the pathology of Crohn's disease and know what those cells look like that are involved with the pathological process in the intestine, you will realize that every one of those cells, every one of those inflammatory cells, has a CB2 receptor on it, and THC binds to those CB2 receptors and can induce cell death in those Crohn's cells. I learned about the benefits of cannabis for Crohn's when I was working at Medican in 2014. I probably saw a couple of dozen Crohn's patients, and every single one of them told exactly the same story. They said, all I have to do is take a couple of puffs, and my abdominal pain goes away almost instantly, and it really helps me. So, but none of these people were using cannabis oil on a daily basis to try to do more than relieve the symptoms of their Crohn's disease. So, if you take the oil in the same way that someone with cancer would take the oil several times a day over a long period of time, you can drastically improve the quality of life of these Crohn's patients.
Wow, that's pretty amazing, because I know that the traditional pharmaceutical protocols for Crohn's, it's like hit or miss with some people. Sometimes you see people find relief, and other times you don't.
And they're with very strong medications that aren't necessarily great long-term options. I think that's the other thing, especially when we're working with GI complaints, whether it be Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. It really, if you can support the body through natural supportive means, that's definitely I think a better approach, certainly for the patient, than long-term steroid use, which you might end up getting to relatively the same endpoint as far as symptom control, but from long-term vitality and health and wellness of the patient, it's much better if it can be, an internally generated process through support, rather than doing fairly strong drugs that are given, externally to treat the symptoms. It's much more of addressing the flares and not really getting to the root.
Right. So would a combination of, say, curcumin, which is also known not just for its antioxidant, but for the anti-inflammatory qualities, would the same thing apply there with combining, say, curcumin and cannabis for treating an autoimmune problem like Crohn's?
Joe, did you want to speak? Yeah.
Go ahead, Harry.
Well, I was going to say, I typically, on something like that, I often will start with more of a integrative, always starting with the diet and lifestyle just as the cornerstone. And so if someone's got, intermittent flares with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, I mean, making sure that they're, starting on a daily meditation practice of some sort, at least 10 minutes a day, just to have some quiescence to the nervous system. And that can really help, prevent flares. theirs, but then also making sure that they're on a whole foods diet. And we were talking about antioxidants earlier. The best place to get your antioxidants is from your fresh fruits and vegetables. And so really making sure that they're, eating the rainbow, quote unquote, and having that be the foundation, and then moving up that ladder, starting to work with some focused supplements, curcumin being one that I use a tremendous amount, and the other one being essential fatty acids, whether that be, in a fish oil, or if they're vegan, I use a marine algae oil. And that really helps to, again, support the body from the ground up. And I think that in conjunction with cannabis, I've had a lot of success. If some people are saying, listen, when I do the cannabis, I get a great response, and I'm starting to do a lot better, period, and taking these supplements, even if it's only a couple times a day, it's too difficult or it's an added cost. Can we just stick with the cannabis? I think there's the flexibility in that, unlike with the cancers, where it's a lot more where we're more nervous about affecting the antioxidant capacity or the pro-oxidant capacity of CBD. When we're dealing with the non-cancer diagnosis, there's a lot more, I think, freedom to experiment a little bit. And I typically do with the GI stuff, and certainly, as I had mentioned, with insomnia, if cannabis, isn't able to treat that in and of itself, then I'll often add some other traditional, integrative functional approaches for insomnia. So again, really not making a final decision until I've done, my intake and due diligence with their history before kind of going forward with a protocol or plan.
Yeah, both of you are truly pioneering something completely new here, I believe, in terms of finding what works and what doesn't. And does it ever drive you crazy, coming from being formally trained as a medical doctor, where you're taught to rely on scientific data, and in this case, you're basically unable to do that because there isn't any set in stone scientific study to draw from?
I would take exception with that. I think that my background as a clinician and a traditional medical doctor, where I utilize the medical literature to help me and guide me with my patients, I do that every day. I find the preclinical data that is available and extrapolate that data for my patients with cannabis. I do the preclinical cannabis data and utilize it to construct therapeutic protocols, and so it is science based on the best science available today, but not at the same level as a clinical trial. We don't have that. But it's the best science that I think anyone could utilize. And but when I get a new patient with a diagnosis of a cancer that I don't see every day or see frequently, I search the medical literature to find what has been written, what research has been done. Yeah. Some scientists take the cells from the cancer and do experiments on them, and I utilize all of that literature to help me, to help guide me in deciding what to do with the patient. For example, yesterday I consulted with the sister of a patient in Argentina. The sister was in this country, and her brother has hepatocellular carcinoma and cirrhosis and hepatitis C. And so I utilize the data. I know that CBD has antiviral activity. So the usual protocol that I might use for a patient with hepatocellular carcinoma, I amplified because of his active hepatitis C. I gave more CBD in the therapeutic protocol because he also had cirrhosis, which was influencing his condition. I bumped the CBD up even further. So the protocol that I would use for a patient who had just hepatocellular carcinoma was different for this patient. and it was all based on the scientific literature, what is available.
Right. See, and you actually helped me to articulate, my thought there, because, what I'm trying to say about what you are doing is that you are sort of forging a completely new scientific path that hasn't already been written in that same way as, just traditional medicine, where exactly what dose for this particular disease and all of that. I mean, you really have to work with your patients to find the right course of action with a whole new science that hasn't been, the book hasn't been written yet, really.
It's interesting. You should say that, because I'm going to write the book.
Good. Okay.
I'm going to write the book this fall. I'm taking off 3 months with the intention of putting down as much of this information as I can into book form, and
yeah, I think that is just so needed right now, from a perspective of the physician. To get it all on paper is really fantastic. And I was just so enthralled with the research that Mara was doing, and her ability to basically process all of this data and record like the protocols that she's discovered with her, working with patients by trial and error. And, now with all of the things that you're doing at Calla Spring Wellness, I mean, it's really, truly impressive. And, I mean, you could certainly consider yourselves complete pioneers in this regard, I think. So
it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I just the one thing that I would say, as far as the wealth of information behind traditional allopathic medicine, this idea that every time a patient comes in and has a diagnosis, there's a discrete treatment protocol, and it's going to work for everyone. For someone with a urinary tract infection, they go into 10 doctors. They're more or less going to get an option of 1 or 2 different antibiotics. For a lot of other things, it is not that clear cut. I mean, diabetes being one example, will typically, a lot of people will start with one medicine. Maybe it's going to be metformin, but then how people respond to the dietary and lifestyle changes, and then if that doesn't work and the disease progresses, there isn't like a one-to-one thing of like, if this then that. For the diabetes medication, oncology is another perfect example of that. It is very much, there are places that they start, but then there's also a lot of experimenting and changing to see how people respond. And so I think that that's the art of medicine that has been a little bit more obscured in the last 15 or 20 years. But I think that this is one of the things that I think that Dr. Joe and I really appreciate about the cannabis medicine. It really, brings the clinician back into the picture as far as being able to tabulate all the information you have. And then with that, and by staying abreast of the current studies and seeing what options the patient has in front of them, really collating all that into a best practices for that person in front of them. And so instead of it being an evidence-based medicine that's really based on population, right? These drugs pass through the FDA, and it's based on, usually hundreds, if not thousands of patients, but those aren't individuals. And I think one of the things that's happening in medicine in general, certainly functional medicine is addressing this a lot, is that populations are not people. And what you really need to do as much as possible is get that individual history in front of you, maybe examine some of their genetics, really dig into their history and their diet and lifestyle, so that you can make a very appropriate and personal recommendation on the best way to proceed forward. And I think that cannabis has just been a beautiful window into that opportunity.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
I totally agree with that, Harry. And it brings to mind there are a lot of people that think that one size fits all, that everybody should take a gram of indica a day and their cancer will be cured in 90 days and then they're done with it. And that is a total myth, as you know. There is no one size that fits all. Different tumors require different ratios of cannabinoids, and most of the people that derive benefit from the cannabis will also derive benefit from maintaining some level of cannabis intake in an ongoing process and for a long time or maybe even indefinitely in order to keep the cannabis, the cancer that was controlled by the cannabis under control forever. So
Right.
there is no 90-day regimen. There is no one size fits all. Those are all myths.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm getting the signal that it's time to wrap it up. But wow, this has been an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much. We have a lot of work ahead of us, I think, in this industry to kind of, catch up with what the body will actually, how the body is going to respond to all of the different protocols that are being discovered as we speak. And it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be doing this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah. Well, thank you again to both of you. I really appreciate it. And it's unfortunately time to say goodbye, but no doubt I'll be speaking with each of you again sometime in the near future, and I'd love to follow up with any of the articles or research that you're doing, and of course, Dr. Joe, your book. I'm really looking forward to seeing that come out. I think it'll be, something that'll help so many people. So anyway, that's it for us today at the Cannabis Reporter. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop. I'd like to personally say thank you again to my guests, Dr. Joe Goldstrich and Dr. Harry McElroy, for sharing their insights and knowledge with us today. If you'd like to learn more about the work they do at Calispring Wellness, please visit us online at thecannabisreporter.com and click broadcast to find today's episode. I will post their biographies and a link to the website. I'd also like to express our deepest gratitude for our radio sponsors, hempmeds.com and HealthTerra. We could not be doing this without you. And thanks again to Dr. Brian Donner for our Medical Marijuana Minute Update. He'll be back again next week with another edition. And of course, it goes without saying how much we appreciate our engineers here at Star Worldwide Networks for making us shine. And I'd like to say a particular thank you to Sedona, who is our producer today. Always nice to be working with such amazing people here. Last but not least, thanks to all of you for listening. Tune in again next week, same time, same place, for another episode of the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay informed, share what you've learned, and make it a great day.
Evergreen is calling. Evergreen is always where I feel fine. The blue's blue falling, and sheets made forever.
You're busy, running around from work to kids to evening events. Healthcare shouldn't be adding to your daily running around. Simplify your healthcare with HealthTerra for only $15 per month per individual or $18 per month per family with up to 9 kids, by the way. You can eliminate doctor office visits with 24/7 access to doctors via phone, video, or the mobile app. Not only do you get prescriptions filled over the phone, but save up to 85% on those prescriptions. This is a supplemental plan and not insurance. Healthcare made easy. HealthTerra.com.
Are you getting enough CBD each day? HempMeds carries the most trusted CBD oil brands like Real Scientific Hemp Oil and Dixie Botanicals to make it easy to add cannabinoids like CBD to your diet. We hold all our hemp oil products to our rigorous triple lab tested standard to ensure that you and your family receive only the highest quality and most reliable CBD products. HempMeds is your trusted source for CBD. Visit hempmeds.com to get our premium CBD oil today. Use discount code CBD20 to get 20% off your first order.